Welcome to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast. I'm your host, Ashley Markle. I am a curriculum development specialist here at NCBRT, and I work in collaboration with subject matter experts to create valuable and timely training for the responder community. The National Center for Biomedical Research and Training provides mobile training to both the national and international emergency response community. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're starting our new series on leadership with some of our favorite instructors. This time I'm talking with Roy Bethge, a frequent friend of the podcast. Hi.
Hey, Ashley, good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Can you go ahead and start by telling us a bit about yourself? I know you've had some changes in what you've been up to lately, so.
Life is crazy, that's for sure. So a little over a year ago, I actually got hired by Hard Rock Casino in Rockford to become their director of security. That's after a 35-year career in law enforcement with a couple different agencies. Retired in 2022, I guess that was now, from Cherry Valley PD here in Northwest Illinois as the chief of police. I've been working with LSU NCBRT since 2013, I think, 2014 maybe. Teach a bunch of different classes, do some course development stuff, and enjoy spending time with you doing this podcast.
Thank you. So to start off this series on leadership, I'm going to hit you with a really basic one. How do you define leadership?
It's a fantastic question. It's interesting. We've been doing some work around leadership for many years. I'm a student of leadership. I would not consider myself an expert in leadership. I frankly don't think anybody could ever be an expert in leadership because it's constantly evolving. Mm-hmm. But I've been talking to some people, especially younger people lately, and I've asked that exact question. Tell me the difference between management and leadership. And it's amazing to me that people get stuck on those two different ideas. Mm-hmm. And if you think about leadership in its most traditional form, really it's about influence, right? And some of the classical definitions say it's nothing more than influence. The problem I have with that definition is it leaves out a moral and ethical component, right? You can look at people in leadership positions throughout history that have used that influence for things that we wouldn't have approved of or didn't approve of, or that were detrimental to society. So it has to be more than that. I look at it as, kind of pursuing a common goal for an ethical and moral purpose. And it's about inspiring others and about inspiring self. And certainly for me, I am the most difficult person I will ever lead day to day. Pick a topic, pick physical health, pick weight management. Mm-hmm. We know how to do it. All of us know how to do it. But struggling with it is something that I always have done, right? I clearly right now don't spend enough time focused on my physical health because I'm crazy busy. Sounds like an excuse, but I know how to do it, right? So I can't even lead myself, which isn't necessarily true. I just need to be better about it. So we take that thought about inspiring others and take it to the next level. I think most great leaders are servant leaders, trying to figure out how we and they and the people that work in organizations, how can we help them to become the best versions of themselves? Not some cookie cutter approach, but how do we allow for those individual differences and help them to become the best version of themselves, and to take that to the next level, right? The difference between management and leadership. I don't believe you manage people. I think you manage things, you manage processes. Usually management is something that I think is relatively easily taught. I don't think that's the same about leadership. There's a lot of books about leadership. Last time I looked at the data, the leadership training business is a $60 billion a year industry in the United States alone. Wow. Which makes me wonder, when you look at organizations and you talk to people and ask about their leaders and their organizations, the number of negative stories that you hear, things that aren't going great. We're spending a lot of money and a lot of time doing leadership development. Is it working? It doesn't certainly seem like it in a lot of different places. It's a longer answer than you probably wanted, but. No,
that's great. So can you share an example from your career where your core values in leadership of integrity, courage, and character kind of guided your decision-making, and how did it impact the outcome?
Yeah, so first let me share kind of where those core values come from, because they're not my idea by any stretch of the imagination. I read a book years and years ago called Courage, the Backbone of Leadership by Gus Lee. And I've had an opportunity now to become friends with Gus Lee. We've had some conversations around this concept. But in his book, he outlines the difference between, good core values, good values. There's lots of them. And he defines integrity, courage, and character as the three highest core values. And I believe so strongly in it that when I was at my last police department, last two police departments, I actually had a sign made that said just integrity, courage, and character. And in my office, I had these two, I call them Starbucks kind of chairs, where I would often have conversations with people, informal conversations for the most part, sometimes more formal and more discipline related. But I took that sign and I actually hung it above the chair that someone else would sit in, not my chair, because I wanted to make sure that when I was having a conversation with someone, I always tried to focus on those core values: integrity, courage, and character. Integrity being more than, doing the right thing when no one's looking, which is the classical definition.
Right.
I think in this day and age, doing what you say you're going to do. The number of people that promise to do something or say, yeah, I'll take care of that, and don't get it done, that really bothers me. So I think there's a piece of integrity involved in that. Courage is kind of around the idea of always picking the hardest right thing to do. Often in circumstances, conversations, pick a topic, there's more than one right way, but courage requires us to pick the hardest right way. You think about like conversations that you need to have. And throughout my history, I've been turned down for more special positions, more police chief's jobs than I can even remember. And I'll never forget, like, I would ask for feedback, and I'm a high feedback person. I like to have details, like, why didn't I get this position? What could I have done better? More often than not, the person giving me that feedback was so uncomfortable, maybe a lack of courage, lack of skill, lack of training, they would just blow me off. They would just say, yeah, it was somebody else's turn, just wasn't your time yet. Or how's that helpful? Right. But someone who says that courage is a high core value for them, they would be willing to have that hard conversation, give the person some really specific feedback that you might not enjoy hearing it as the person receiving it. But how do we expect people to get better if we're not willing to give them that feedback? And I find for me personally, even in my position today, when I have to give really hard feedback, I try to spend some time thinking about it, usually at least, day before, night before, make some notes, think through how this conversation is going to go. And I find myself stressing more about the conversation that I'm going to have than I probably should, because almost every time, I say almost every time I've actually had the conversation, it's always gone better than it did in my head when I played it and had it ready for the day before. So, setting expectations is part of that conversation.
Absolutely. So kind of going along with that, how do you balance providing support and guidance while also empowering your team to take initiatives and lead themselves?
I think it starts by leading by example, right? At the end of the day, we have a lot of people that say that they're not micromanagers, and it's a term that I am not particularly fond of, but I tell all of my team, I'm not a micromanager. We have things that we have to get done. I have a whole lot of other responsibilities other than whatever the topic is or the thing is that they're responsible for and doing. I can't be involved in every decision that they make, or they can't be successful. So I usually tell them, here's the task, or here's the strategic plan. Here's the goals that we have for the next month, 3 months, 90 days, 3 months, 90 days, year, or whatever that looks like. You're responsible for getting them done. I will be here to provide assistance, to provide coaching, support, answer questions, but I'm not checking in on you on a daily basis. I don't need to know. Again, if you're having problems, come to me, but I shouldn't be micromanaging. That's a lack of leadership. It's a lack of trust. And if you have to do that, I guess my first question is, do you have the right people in the right positions? So part of it is always being consciously aware that in order to help others become better, again, that servant leadership, you have to give them the opportunities to figure things out on their own, and sometimes in their own way. Just because I have a way of doing a project or a process doesn't mean it's the best way. Someone may have a better one, except if I require them to do it my way, it's really not helpful to them. The other thing that I have to allow people to do is I have to allow people to fail. At my ripe old age, and with many of my experiences, I mean, the best lessons I've ever had in my life is when I've failed, sometimes miserably and publicly, but those lessons that we learn when we fail are much more valuable than being spoon-fed answers and just creating this cookie cutter model of how we do things. So I think, How do you balance it? Very carefully. You also need
Mhm.
people around you that are willing to tell you the truth and be those truth tellers. I'm lucky to have some of those in my life that I connect with on a pretty frequent basis. We talk about, big ideas and things that are going on. And, sometimes I'll even bounce ideas off of friends that I trust. And, how would you handle this? Or what kind of feedback would you give me? Is there a better way? And sometimes they're like, you did what? You said what? That probably wasn't the best way to do that. And I'm like, you're probably right. So again, I think it's that open dialogue.
Yeah. So one thing that I find fascinating is, generational differences in workplaces. And how do you think kind of the evolving dynamics of work nowadays affects leadership? Do you think it's changing? Do you think it's evolving with it?
I think the core concept of inspiring others yourself to toward common goals that we talked about with an ethical and a moral component. I don't know that has changed. I think the way that we need to do it has certainly changed in our hyper remote workplace. And, you have all these
Mhm.
businesses, some have gone fully remote, some are pulling everyone back into the office. So there's no standard answer to that question, right? And I got involved with NCBRT in the first place in 2013 because I used to speak a lot at conferences on the topic of generational differences.
Hmm.
And a senior administrator from NCBRT saw the talk and said, "Hey, we're having some of these same conversations internally. Would you come work with our leadership team and see if we can improve that?" And that was kind of what launched me into my life at NCBRT, which has been amazing.
Mhm.
And what I've certainly have seen, and I don't know that we know the impact long term yet post COVID, um, but there's a pretty significant mental health concern that I have for us as a nation, really post COVID, as we kind of come back out of that, and we have all these different, situations and issues that we're trying to work out. Certainly, what I have seen, and this isn't new, but I think it's exaggerated post COVID in this current Zoom world that we live in, is people's difficulty communicating with one another, those soft skills. I think soft skills were already
Mm,
challenging for a lot of people,
yeah.
but now that we're disconnected and looking at each other on screens, I certainly have seen that has gotten worse. And if you work in an industry like I do, gaming, that's a hospitality industry, like that's a
Hmm.
requirement. Like you have to be friendly to people, smile at people. And it's those small gestures and those informal conversations that really make a difference and move the needle. I just think I'm beginning to see more and more of a struggle in that space. So I think from a leadership perspective for leaders, we need to figure out how to do a better job, again, of empowering people to help them grow and help them improve. And I think that's one of those areas that we really need to focus on.
Hmm. Um, do you have an example of a leader in your life that has made a difference in how you have developed as a leader, either positively or negatively?
I have hundreds of them. And I think the key is you become some version of the leaders that you respect the most and trust the most. And there are things that you don't do or don't handle certain ways because of experiences that you've had. I think if I look at my life, think about the 35 years in law enforcement specifically, I've worked for some great, great leaders. I've also worked probably for more not so good leaders, some downright bad leaders. Just because you're in a position that has rank or positional authority doesn't make you a leader. Some of the most powerful leaders in organizations don't have any rank, they don't have a title. What they have is they have influence over their team. When I took over at Cherry Valley, one of the things that I noticed early on, and I went there because they were having some struggles with some internal issues. I initially was going to be the interim chief to help them fix some issues. Ended up staying for 2.5 years. Um, but I had one-on-one meetings with every employee, sworn officers, non-sworn, met with all the village trustees and had conversations. What's going well? What isn't going well? And it turned out that one of the people who had the most influence also was the least liked by the former administration. And it's interesting to me because I had been in a similar place in my career years and years before that. And what happened to me is when I finally got my first promotion from officer to sergeant, and I had some of the authority to make some of the changes that I had been calling for and asking for, sometimes not in the right ways, but certainly had been asking for them. Um, I found that it was really fulfilling when I was allowed to start to make those changes. And some of the changes that I thought were going to be successful, frankly, weren't, right, way back then. So
Mm-hmm.
when I get to Cherry Valley, it's kind of the laboratory for me to test out the things that I believe and the processes that I believe in. But one individual in particular, like, gave him the opportunity, ended up promoting him to sergeant, and he did an amazing job. Such a good person that I actually took him with me when I left Cherry Valley. He left a few months after me and is currently working for me in a management position.
Wow, that's really cool. So to wrap us up today, kind of what practical steps do you think individuals can take to develop their leadership skills, and how can they identify those opportunities to lead in their lives?
Well, I think the first thing is find people around you that you trust, that are willing to give you feedback and help you grow. You know, the old adage, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely true. But if you're an aspiring leader and you want to grow, again, regardless of rank or position, you have to find people that you can get together with. And especially, now that we have this hyper connected world, it's easier than ever to get together with people, even if it's over Zoom for, an hour every couple of weeks, an hour a month, maybe, share a book or share some other reading material. But you have to have those people in your life that push you to become the best version of yourself. And those people to hold you accountable when you say you're going to do something, to make sure that you actually follow through and you do it. I think those things in themselves will help to make you successful. For me, it's been a lifelong process. I have grown a lot over the years and continue to grow by just kind of putting myself out there and being willing to fail. I've failed more times in my life than I can possibly even remember, and have always learned the most from. I would also say journaling is really big. And I say that, although I don't do a whole lot of it anymore, I still do a little bit. But when I was really in my biggest times of growth as a leader, I woke up early every morning, which I still do, but I spent time journaling and focusing on how did yesterday go, some gratitude stuff that's in there as well. So you make sure that when life gets chaotic and crazy, which it does for all of us, that you're also focusing on the things that are going well in your life, because there always are some things. For me, the other really big things, and especially now that we're kind of, the internet's a thing, there's so much information about leadership that's out there available online. But I would caution anyone to make sure that if you're reading content about leadership or any topic, that you're vetting where that content is coming from, because there are for a fair number of people who just post stuff that really isn't based in research and doesn't have a good vetting process. So I think you have to be careful about that. For me, I'm a major reader. I love to read. Again, I don't read as much as I used to, but I have started again because I have to force myself to continue to grow and learn. But, I mentioned Gus's book, Courage, the Backbone of Leadership. Fantastic book. Daring Greatly by Brene Brown is a phenomenal book. I try to read it at least once a year, just kind of as a reminder. And along the Daring Greatly lines, one of the things that Brene Brown talks about is not to take advice or criticism, if you will, from someone that you wouldn't go to ask advice. And I think that's really important in some of the negative social media that you say. You can't control what other people are saying about you online, behind your back. You also can't worry about it because you wouldn't ask any of those people for their advice. So why let it bother you? Her statement comes out of Teddy Roosevelt's speech, "The Man in the Arena," right? If you're not in the arena with me getting your butt kicked, I don't care what you think about it. I just don't care. Easy to say, right?
Yeah. No, but that's a really good thing to keep in mind, especially when we have so many opinions out there.
A lot of opinions for sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And, for anybody who's listening, we'll make sure to put links to some of the books that you've referenced in our show notes. We'll usually try to do that. So thank you so much, Roy, for joining us yet again. I'm sure we'll be hearing from you again soon.
Thanks for having me. Always enjoy it anytime.
Thanks.
If you have any questions or topic suggestions for future episodes, please send us an email at podcast@ncbrt.lsu.edu. Make sure you subscribe to the LSU NCBRT Preparedness Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts.